In September 1939, when Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler launched a sudden invasion of Poland, Europe erupted into flames of war. Few could have imagined that this conflict would spread into a global storm, lasting 6 long years, claiming tens of millions of lives, and forever reshaping the world. This was World War II, the bloodiest conflict in human history. In the early days, many nations tried to remain on the sidelines. The United States, powerful yet distant across the ocean, watched as chaos unfolded across Europe and Asia. But the flames of war spread quickly. German forces swept through France, Italy aligned itself with the Axis, while Japan expanded its empire across the Pacific. The world seemed to be slipping into darkness, with no place truly safe. Then came December 7, 1941, the day that changed America's destiny. Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, devastating the U.S. Pacific Fleet and killing thousands of servicemen in just a few hours. The nation was shocked, outraged, and united. The very next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war, officially thrusting the United States into the global conflict. From that moment forward, the course of history shifted. America's industrial engine roared to life, transforming into a war machine of unimaginable scale. Thousands of planes, tanks, and ships were produced at record speed. Young men, fresh from classrooms or quiet family farms, donned uniforms and marched off to battlefields far from home. But this is not only a story of weapons and strategy. It is the story of people. The fear as bombs rained down on cities. The quiet resilience of mothers sending their sons to war. The unyielding desire for freedom among nations crushed under the heel of fascism. Above all, it is the human struggle to reclaim light from the shadows. From the blood-soaked sands of Normandy to the fiery island battles of Iwo Jima, from the relentless air raids over London to the final collapse of Berlin, World War II was a saga of tragedy and heroism, devastation and hope, sorrow and the dream of peace. In this journey, we will retrace the war from its explosive beginnings to the downfall of the Axis powers, from Pearl Harbor to the moment the white flag rose over Japan. It is not just a history lesson, but a reminder for today and tomorrow. War has the power to destroy everything, yet unity, courage, and the will to endure are what carry humanity through the darkest times. When the Second World War began in 1939, the United States stood apart. The nation was still scarred by the memory of World War I, a conflict that had claimed the lives of more than 100,000 American soldiers just 2 decades earlier. Isolationist sentiment was strong. Many believed that Europe's wars were not America's concern, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt faced immense pressure to keep the country out of foreign entanglements. But while the American people longed for peace, the storm abroad was impossible to ignore. Hitler's armies marched relentlessly across Europe, conquering Poland, Norway, Belgium, and France in swift succession. Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine, its cities battered nightly by German bombers. In Asia, Imperial Japan sought dominance, occupying vast territories in China and casting its gaze toward the Pacific. By 1940, Roosevelt knew that American neutrality could not last forever. He began to prepare quietly, building up the nation's defenses and introducing the Lend-Lease Act, which allowed the U.S. to supply weapons and supplies to Britain and other allies. It was a delicate balance, supporting freedom abroad while trying not to provoke war at home. Then came the morning of December 7, 1941. As dawn broke over Hawaii, hundreds of Japanese aircraft appeared suddenly in the skies above Pearl Harbor. Torpedoes ripped through battleships, bombs rained down on airfields, and explosions echoed across the harbor. In less than 2 hours, the U.S. Pacific Fleet lay crippled. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and the nation was left reeling. President Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. The very next day, Congress declared war on Japan with near-unanimous support. Soon after, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies, declared war on the United States. What had once been a distant conflict had now become America's fight. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of young men enlisted, while millions more were drafted into service. Training camps sprang up across the nation, preparing soldiers for combat in Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. Factories converted overnight, shifting from producing cars and household goods to tanks, aircraft, and munitions. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, whose strength and determination embodied the home front spirit. For America, World War II was not just about defending allies, it became a battle for survival and principles. The nation was thrust into a struggle against tyranny, against ideologies that threatened to extinguish freedom itself. And though the path ahead would be filled with sacrifice, the attack on Pearl Harbor had awakened something powerful, a united America ready to fight. This was the beginning of a transformation. From a country hesitant to engage, the United States would rise to become the arsenal of democracy, a decisive force that would help turn the tide of the greatest war in history. Every great conflict has its decisive moments, battles where the fate of nations is determined and the course of history is altered. In the Second World War, these turning points came on both sides of the globe, shaping the path toward eventual Allied victory. One of the earliest and most significant turning points occurred in the Pacific, the Battle of Midway in June 1942. Just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan sought to eliminate the U.S. Navy as a threat by luring American carriers into a trap. But thanks to brilliant code-breaking and daring strategy, the United States anticipated Japan's plan. In a matter of days, 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, the pride of their navy, were sunk. It was a stunning reversal. For the first time, Japan was on the defensive, and America had gained momentum in the Pacific. Meanwhile, in Europe, the Soviet Union bore the brunt of the Nazi war machine. In 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history, driving deep into Soviet territory. But by late 1942, the Germans found themselves trapped in a brutal battle for the city of Stalingrad. It was a fight of unimaginable suffering. Street by street, house by house, soldiers battled in the freezing cold, with starvation and destruction all around. By February 1943, the German Sixth Army was encircled and forced to surrender. Nearly 300,000 Axis troops were lost. Stalingrad was not just a military defeat for Hitler, it was a psychological blow, marking the beginning of the German retreat from the east. Another critical turning point came in North Africa. Under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower and Britain's Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the Allies launched Operation Torch in 1942, pushing Axis forces out of Africa. This victory opened the door for the invasion of Italy, weakening Hitler's hold on Europe's southern flank and setting the stage for the ultimate assault on Nazi-occupied France. But perhaps the most famous turning point of all came on June 6, 1944, D-Day. On that day, the largest amphibious invasion in history stormed the beaches of Normandy, France. Over 156,000 Allied troops braved machine gun fire, rough seas, and fortified defenses to establish a foothold in Western Europe. The cost was high, but the success of the invasion meant that the liberation of Europe had begun. From that moment forward, Nazi Germany was fighting on 2 fronts, east against the Soviets, west against the Anglo-American forces, a war it could not win. These battles, Midway, Stalingrad, North Africa, and Normandy, were more than just military victories. They were moments of resilience, courage, and sacrifice. They demonstrated the ability of the Allies to adapt, to overcome seemingly impossible odds, and to turn the tide of the most destructive war in human history. By 1944, the writing was on the wall. The Axis powers were weakening, and the Allies were closing in from every direction. But the war was far from over, and the bloodiest battles still lay ahead. By 1944, the Allies had seized the momentum. In the east, the Soviet Union was driving German forces back across their own territory. In the West, the success of D-Day had given the Allies a crucial foothold in France. Yet, the road to victory would be paved with some of the fiercest and bloodiest battles of the entire war. As Allied troops surged through France, Hitler ordered a desperate counterattack. In December 1944, the Germans launched the Ardennes Offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. It was Hitler's last gamble, a surprise assault intended to split Allied lines and force a negotiated peace. In the freezing forests of Belgium, American soldiers, many barely out of training, faced overwhelming odds. Yet they held their ground. After weeks of brutal fighting, the German offensive collapsed, costing them vital troops and equipment they could never replace. The failure of the Battle of the Bulge sealed Germany's fate. In the spring of 1945, Allied forces advanced on Germany from both east and west. The Soviets closed in on Berlin, fighting street by street through a ruined city. Meanwhile, American and British troops liberated concentration camps, uncovering the horrors of the Holocaust, mass graves, starving prisoners, and evidence of genocide on an unimaginable scale. The world was confronted with the darkest truth of Hitler's regime. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life in a bunker beneath Berlin. Just days later, on May 8, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Victory in Europe, VE Day, was declared. Across the Allied world, celebrations erupted, but they were tempered by the knowledge that the war in the Pacific was still raging. Against Japan, the fight was far from over. Despite devastating losses at Midway, Leyte Gulf, and the relentless island-hopping campaign, Japanese forces refused to surrender. Battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa revealed the staggering human cost of invading Japanese territory. American soldiers faced fanatical resistance, kamikaze attacks, and a determination that seemed unbreakable. Faced with the prospect of an invasion that could cost millions of lives, President Harry Truman made a fateful decision. In August 1945, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destruction was instant and catastrophic. Within days, Japan surrendered. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, World War II officially came to an end. The war had lasted 6 years. It spanned every continent and ocean, claimed more than 70 million lives, and left the world forever changed. Out of the ashes rose a new international order. The United Nations was formed to prevent future global conflict, and the United States and Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War. World War II was over, but its legacy, of sacrifice, resilience, and lessons learned, would shape the decades to come. Humanity had survived its darkest hour, but the scars of the conflict would never be forgotten. World War II was more than just a clash of armies and nations. It was a test of humanity itself. From the ruins of cities reduced to rubble, to the silent graves of millions who never returned, the war revealed both the darkest depths of cruelty and the highest peaks of courage. For soldiers, it was a story of endurance. Young men and women who left behind families, who fought on distant shores, often never to return home. For civilians, it was survival, enduring hunger, bombings, and occupation, clinging to hope even when the world seemed lost. And for the victims of genocide, it was tragedy on an unimaginable scale, a reminder of how fragile human dignity can be when hatred goes unchecked. Yet, out of the ashes, something remarkable emerged. Nations came together to form the United Nations, seeking peace through dialogue rather than war. The idea of human rights, once ignored, was enshrined as a guiding principle for the future. The rebuilding of Europe and Japan showed the resilience of societies determined to rise again, stronger than before. But perhaps the greatest legacy of World War II is the lesson it leaves behind. Freedom is never free, and peace must never be taken for granted. Each generation inherits the responsibility to remember the sacrifices of those who came before, to ensure that the horrors of global war are never repeated. As we look back on that era of fire and steel, we do so not only to honor the past but to guard the future. The voices of the fallen still echo, urging us to choose understanding over division and hope over despair. World War II ended in 1945, but its memory still shapes the world we live in today.